a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room.
Possible GTA suspect there now, 4730 Crystal Springs
Welcome,
Drive,
everybody.
in the parking lot above the merry-go-round.
They're playing our song.
Description, adding striping to a black Cadillac four-door.
Welcome to the interview room.
Plates, vehicle license, Utah 2904.
John and I
California, Paul William North 011. Code 2 incident
are
3196.
pretty grateful that you're here.
Bush units additional 211 in progress, 1818 Southwest Moreland Boulevard, 1818 Southwest Moreland Boulevard.
1607 Metro, all units, 1607 is following a code 37 vehicle, 770 Regal 2-door. He is on the southbound Harbor Freeway from the Hollywood Freeway. It is a 2-door Buick Regal 227 Tom Zebra Paul has Southwest units, all units, citizen report, Bob
Alert zone.
West Martin Luther King Boulevard. Citizen report, Bob 3742 West Martin Luther King Boulevard. 3 incident 3142. 11-8-1 in Hollywood, no Hollywood available. Domestic violence. 5139 Fountain Avenue. Code 2 RD is 669 apartment 8 incident 227.
All right. Well, welcome to choir practice. This is going to be an amazing evening. And it's a new segment where John and I are going to try this out. And tonight we're going to focus on a couple of things about our individual careers, but more importantly about the totality of what's happening out there in the world in police work. And sometimes we'll touch on society, but sometimes we just want to focus on the good brothers and sisters in blue who are out there. Also our nurses and our doctors and our paramedics and our lifeguards and our firefighters. We want to focus on first responders and public safety as a whole in this segment. So as you are just coming in, this segment is called Choir Practice. And we are going to tell real stories, as well as put your seatbelts on, because you're probably going to laugh like you've never laughed before. My brother John over here, as you know, Sergeant John Lamb. Welcome, Johnny.
It's a pleasure to be here. And I see we already have a question. What's the wildest car chase you were in?
It's already started. Okay, and that's the key to tonight. Ask questions, and if we we'll answer them for you from our individual experiences. But first of all, let me lay a little foundation on what just happened over the last couple of days. Not only with Coburger real fast, but Karen and I just got back today, actually about 2 hours ago. We just took Dylan up back to school, and so he's in the aviation program up in Utah State, and so he's learning how to fly. Hopefully one day he'll be a commercial pilot, but that's his goal. And so we dropped him off up there. We were trying to get home last night, Johnny, but man, we just couldn't do it. So I had to cancel last night. And so here we are tonight though. And what we want to tell you a couple of things. My career, 1982 is when it started. John was before me because he was in Riverside. And then I retired in 07. So I had a couple of weekends on the job, enough to get in trouble like the next guy. However, that said, John is one of the most amazing human beings you'll ever meet. I mean, and I'm not just saying that because we've been friends for so many years. He really is. He's the salt of the earth. And so we're hoping tonight that we make you laugh. Hopefully you cry, but as a result of laughing, and then we hope that you ask us a bunch of other questions. And no, I am not following the Karen Reed trial. I know about it, but I'm not involved in that right now. I don't have the bandwidth for that, to be honest with you, currently. But that said, so let's talk a little bit about Oceanside, California. Those of you who just saw the news, about a week ago, Johnny, the pier burnt down?
Yeah, the restaurant that was, I think, a Ruby Tuesday years ago.
Yep, Ruby Tuesday. And that thing lit on fire. Our inside information is it was a bunch of transients in the restaurant, sleeping in the restaurant that had closed down.
This is my surprise face.
I talked to somebody at the PD, there's like, yeah, they lit it on fire by accident. And so,
do you remember, Chris, when it caught on fire in 1982 during the firework display?
I forget that one, to be honest with you.
It was my first. I had just come to Oceanside from Riverside Sheriff's, and remember 4th of July was all hands on deck, riot helmets, because it was not if problems were going to, but when. And the pier had already been damaged by a storm, and they used to shoot the fireworks off of a barge at the end of the pier.
I do.
And I was on foot patrol with Pat McCarthy, and the fireworks started to go off, and then we noticed that the end of the pier was burning. So what we thought was a pretty cool element to the fireworks show. They managed to put it out, but that 4th of July ended with a fellow who threw an M80 firecracker. And this describes Oceanside. You got to understand that for the fireworks display, there were probably 200,000 people down on the beaches. And some clown threw an M80, and our initial report was that it had exploded in a baby stroller. And by the time we heard it go off and we heard the fighting begin, and as Pat McCarthy and I came through the crowd, it was a lynching in progress. There were 5 or 6 guys that were beating this 19-year-old kid because he had thrown the fireworks. And so, we dived in because it was probably be bad form to stand by and watch someone beaten to death. So we then began getting kicked and hit, and so we called for backup. Everybody came, and the story ultimately has an anticlimactic conclusion. The child was uninjured. The fireworks blew up above the stroller. Mom and Dad didn't want to wait around to make a report. So now we've got this 19-year-old kid in custody who went to jail for public intoxication. Now, looking back 42 years, was he actually intoxicated? He was going to jail for something after throwing a firecracker in the middle of a crowd like that. But yeah, 1982, they set the pier was set on fire.
Well, there you go. And did you see Bobby Gilliam? And Bob, if you're around, I can always drop you a link. You can join us here for choir practice. It's up to you.
I'll say to you, Bob, to indice you, 180 Canyon, the PCP guy. I know you'll remember it.
If you want the link, Bobby, I'll send it to you via text. So just let me know, and then you can jump in here too. So everybody, this gives you an idea what choir practice is about right there. And just a little historical context. In law enforcement, what choir practice means, it's a time after the shift to decompress. And okay, Bobby just said, send it. I'm sending it. Okay, folks, it's going to get interesting. This is unexpected. Bobby just showed up here. This is going to be so much fun. All right, hang on. Let me get him. All right, brother, here it comes. Put your seatbelts on. This is another fun one. Well, anyway, while Bob's getting ready to come in here, what choir practice is at the end of the night when all of the fun is over with, everybody gets together. You know, typically it's we used to meet across the street in the old courtyard parking lot. Remember that, John?
County mental health parking lot after the courtroom.
It was the county mental health parking lot. That's exactly right. You know, we would just tell war stories. We would laugh. And then at the end of the night, you know, everybody would just kind of high five each other and wish them another good day that we all went home. And yes, I am following the D. Warner case very carefully. Billy and I talk every single other day, you know, every other day. Okay, so let me give you a little information here about Mr. John Lamb. And I know he's, you know, a little bit more quiet than a lot of us, but his career started in Riverside. So, John, tell everybody about Riverside PD. And I know you went from the Air Force right into law enforcement, and that pipe is kind of a signature for Sergeant John Lamb. Tell everybody about that.
When I left the Air Force, I worked for a while at Warner Brothers Studios in security, and then I was hired by Riverside County Sheriffs. And this photograph was taken in 1981. I logged 2 years in the county jail, and I was at for those of you who don't know about Riverside County, it's about the size of the state of New Jersey. It's and it's not the largest county in California, but the Indio Station comprised a huge area of desert to Palm Springs and all of the what they called cove communities, where a lot of the touristas and celebrities who lived in Palm Springs, Palm Desert, Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells. And as you can see from this picture, I guess cops don't carry shotguns anymore. We had shotguns, and we had the police car you see in the background is a Dodge St. Regis, which in the desert was a car that overheated, and it was like driving a convection oven. So I smoked a pipe back then, and as you can see, I was a deputy sheriff, and at the time I wore glasses, and I left Riverside County after having it was an experimental surgery called radial keratotomy back in the early 80s, where I actually had cuts made on my surface of my eye. My vision was 2400 in that picture. The doctor took me down to 20/20 in one eye and 20/15 in the other. So, but the pipe, I started smoking a pipe in the Air Force and continued smoking a pipe. It was like my signature when I was a cop and then as a homicide detective, because pipes are very useful for covering up the aroma of decomp. So,
yeah, and tell them about the reason we had mustaches was we would take Vicks and we would put Vicks on our mustaches.
We would put Vicks on our mustaches, but we actually all had mustaches because it was state law. And Tom Selleck had a mustache. Every cop had a mustache, including guys who shouldn't have grown mustaches.
Yeah, there is a time and a place and a person. All three. So John migrated over to OPD and, had an illustrious career over there. Did not lose you lost the cigar or the pipe, but you picked up the cigar.
I had a cigar that night. Ordinarily, I smoked, but this photograph was taken shortly after being at a death scene, and I didn't have my pipe available, so I did have a cigar.
Nice. Tell him about that. Tell him about the story on this one. Well, I'm going to try to get Bobby in here. He's having a moment.
Yeah. This one was just simply a dead body in a car. I mean, Chris will attest to this, that we dealt with so many dead bodies, and I'm not merely talking about murders. We had accidental deaths. We had autoerotic deaths. We had just unattended deaths where people and cops got called to them all. And in this picture, I was a sergeant, so sergeants always got called when an officer would have a death scene, so we could come out and say, "Yep, he's dead." So, yeah, that picture was probably taken 1992, so a few years have gone by, and I don't smoke anymore. So, but yeah. This was Oceanside. You had to have some idea, and I'm certain when we get Bob will be able to attest to this too. It was just deaths after deaths. We had, you don't want to make light of somebody's death, but we had an instance when I worked as a detective, Chris, where we were called to a dead body in a car overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And right there along North Pacific Street. And this car had been there for several days, and there were like 4 or 5 parking tickets on the car.
All right.
Now, immediately behind the wheel, visible through the windshield, is a guy who was turning into cup of soup. Okay, it's August.
Yikes.
The car is sealed up. And I look at these parking citations, and they're all issued by the same parking enforcement guy. Oh,
he doesn't see the.
The important thing is he's writing parking tickets. So I got on the air and I said, "Hey, I have the parking enforcement unit come down here." So he comes up. He comes up in his little cart, this little golf cart. So I walk him over to the car and I go, "Now, what is it you see through the windshield here?" And he looks and he says, "Well, it looks to me like it could be a dead body." Okay, good. Excellent identification skills. I've noticed that you began putting tickets on this car on Monday. And apparently you put a ticket on this car earlier this morning. You may have noticed that this guy is dead, and conceivably, if we hadn't come to this car, would you put another parking ticket on this car tomorrow and not let anybody know there was a dead guy behind the wheel? And he looks at me and he says, "Well, sir, my job is to write parking tickets." So I said, so the answer to that is yes. Conceivably, you would have continued to hang parking tickets on this guy until what? What's your point? And I mean, and this is when you deal with people who write parking tickets for a living, that was the important thing. But yeah, he.
Okay.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, you can't fix stupid. Let me add Bobby here. Bob, make sure all your tabs are off in the background so we don't get feedback. I put you in, pulled you out real fast. So I heard feedback.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you there, bud?
I am.
It is Bob Gilliam.
Hi, John. Long time no see, buddy.
This is awesome.
How are you guys?
Yeah.
We're doing good, man. It's just so great to have you jump in here. It was neat to.
Yeah, I appreciate you letting me jump in. I just happened to log on here into YouTube a little bit ago and saw the show going on. Saw the byline of the promo and thought, oh, I got to listen to this because
We got to hear this. So, Johnny, Bobby, give everybody a little background on your career. I mean, we were all at OPD together back in the day, but tell them what you did and how your career progressed.
Well, I don't know if it actually progressed, but I had a pretty good career. I jumped around a little bit, and but as you mentioned, the three of us worked at the Oceanside Police Department in the 80s, and specifically from I came on in 1980, and John came on not long after.
82.
Yep. And you were right there somewhere in the middle, Chris, if I remember right. But anyway,
82.
So then I in 86 I went over to Carlsbad, next door to Carlsbad, and worked there for several years. And then I had my family moved out of state, so we went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and then I went on to Denver ultimately, and did 11 years as a Denver police officer. Great times, almost as good at times as working OPD with you chaps. Let me tell you.
Okay, so we have to hear the 180 Canyon. Well, first of all, let me lay the foundation for the city as a whole. Is it you guys cool with that real fast?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Oceanside, our motto used to be sarcastically where the debris meets the sea. And it was just during the 80s and the 90s and the 70s, but I wasn't there for that, but it was absolutely rock and roll. I mean, you could roll out on a Friday night and you knew you were absolutely going to have fun and you had no idea what you were going to run into. And so when I got there, guys like Bob, these old dogs, not that you're older than me, I'm teasing, but road dogs, these guys, my FTO or my TAC officer was Frank Bruckner, and Bob and Frank were very close to one another. They were motors together. And I remember Bruckner one time walking up to me and looking at my shoes and going, "Did you shine those things with a Hershey bar?" And he walked. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in big trouble. But on a Friday night, back then, there was a magazine, statistically, it was We Magazine, said Oceanside, California was at that time, I think around 90, almost 100,000 people in the early 80s, if that.
Yeah, it was about 82,000, call it, in about 1980.
Yeah, and they're up to like 175 now, almost 200,000. But you add 50,000 Marines out at Camp Pendleton, and this is what a Friday night looked like in Oceanside, California.
This was the old Oceanside, a high crime area,
Okay, first of all, did we catch who was doing
Bruce
the hookup here?
It's
Bruce Dunn.
Yeah.
Okay, and listen to the commentator.
This was the old Oceanside, a high crime area, a haven for transients and prostitutes whose favorite pastime.
When you make the local news as a haven for, prostitutes and all this other stuff, back then it was a good time. That's really not how you want to make the news, right? But that's what we were known for.
Was preying on Marines from Camp Pendleton. This is the new Oceanside, a spruced up downtown with an aggressive redevelopment policy, a more visible police force.
And I think that's Marty Gravel.
That looks like private gravel.
Rest in peace, Marty.
I think it's Marty. Yeah. And
Behind the experiment is that if the Marines get paid on Fridays instead of during the week.
so I want to refresh your guys, bring back a lot of great memories here. We have the Palomar Theater, which is no longer. And then, of course, we're going to go down to the Star and stuff. But give everybody a flavor for 200 North Hill Street here, because that's basically what we're looking at. What do you got?
Well, pretty seedy to say the least back in those days. Now, that said, I was there last summer, as you know, John, or Chris, and boy, it's cleaned up tremendously from what it used to be. But back then in the 80s, the transvestites, the prostitutes lined the streets like parking meters. And they were the source of a lot of police activity. You guys will remember all of the street robberies that we used to have on Marine Corps payday weekends. I think the record, at least during my tenure at OPD, was 32 street robberies in 1 8-hour shift, I think, on a Friday night. And 95% of them occurred in probably a 10-block area. And that photo that we're looking at there was one of those areas. So it was it was crazy, and people everywhere. And just to be clear, at least from my point of view, it really wasn't the Marines that created the problems.
They made great victims.
Yes. Unfortunately, many times they were victims, but it was really the elements that are attracted to virtually any military base, all in the U.S., but probably all over the world. And so it's not the Marines. I want to make that clear to the audience that we're not disparaging Marines or the Marine Corps.
No.
Occasionally we would have a wayward Marine, but that was a rare occasion. It was really all of the people that were there trying to prey on the Marines to some extent, and all of the activity involved with having a large military installation. And if I remember right, that was Camp Pendleton was the largest military installation in the world at that time. Am I right on that, John?
You were, and I'm going to take you back to the street robbery. When I lateraled to Oceanside, which is what we called changing from one law enforcement agency to another, my third night on the job, I was set to ride with you, Bob. And if you remember, we were sitting on about the 200 or 300 block of North Hill. I was catching up on reports when we heard gunfire. And then SEB detectives at the time, Jim Wood and Kurt Milam, got on the air and said that they had just witnessed a robbery with shots fired. And as they described it, it was 3 LA gangbangers. They jumped in the car. They took off, and Jack Resner was on them immediately, and you and I were right behind him. This is my third night on the job, and it turns into a pursuit. And if you remember where we went, up Mission, southbound 5, and then we went on Oceanside Boulevard. And as you made the observation, these guys are not from town because they don't know how Oceanside Boulevard ends, which at the time
dead end,
stopped with a huge earth berm and wooden barrier before you went into the adjoining city of Vista. Remember, as they went careening around the corner off the freeway, we saw the gun go out of the car and slide across into the drainage ditch. We could never find it. But by the time the pursuit ended, we had San Diego sheriffs, Carlsbad police, CHP, and
Astria.
They finally stopped, and we took him into custody. It was my third night on the job riding with you, mi amigo.
Well, those were fun times, and you laid out the lateral, coming over as a lateral. I didn't have to train you. I treated you like my partner, not a trainee, because you obviously were experienced and knew what you were doing, and we had some fun times riding together. So thoroughly,
we really did.
And I remember that, Chase. And just to add a little something to that, that was back in a time when the Bloods and the Crips from the LA basin, Los Angeles primarily, they were coming into places like Oceanside, and especially places like Oceanside, and they were trying to get a foothold into the cocaine trafficking there, and they were setting up. And crack cocaine was a major problem in Southern California at the time, and it was at epidemic levels. And even though we already had crack cocaine, the Bloods and the Crips were moving in to claim their territory and take over the trade, or at least try to take over the trade in Oceanside.
Yeah, and let me explain a little bit, Bobby, about geographically why. To continue on kind of laying some foundation here, Oceanside, like I was saying, is 42 square miles. So everybody may think it's a small, it's a small community. It is, but it's a lot of land that goes right up to the, front door of Camp Pendleton. And like I was saying, out at Camp Pendleton, we had 50,000 Marines, and, as a result of that, on a Friday night, what Bob and John were talking about, you could get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these guys coming out in town, and they became, a lot of them, they get intoxicated and they become victims of, robbery, street robberies, and like Bob was talking about. But the one thing about Oceanside is because it's the furthest city north from the U.S. border. Everybody who commits crimes in San Diego, all the way up through North County, gets to Oceanside. And if the U.S. Border Patrol checkpoint, which was between San Clemente and Oceanside, was open, they would stop in Oceanside. Okay. So we had everybody coming south on the Interstate 5. The first city they hit when they leave Orange County is and get into San Diego County is Oceanside. Boom.
It's like a drain catch between LA and San Diego.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And so, we had, you name it, it would happen, and you just didn't know. And so, during the late 80s or mid 80s, like Bob was talking about, we had Main Street, Grape, Hoover, 160, 60, rolling 60s. All these guys were hitting the streets and trying to take over all of our narcotics trade. And I remember from the Motel 9, one of our dope dealers getting shot and thrown off the balcony. And we showed up, and he's like, LA's here. And we're like, where? And of course, nobody knew anything or saw anything, but that was really, didn't you guys sense that was a real shift? Because Daryl Gates put the pressure on him up in LA during the crash teams.
Yeah, this was contemporaneous with crash being implemented, community resources against street hoodlums. And they were, it sounds very dramatic, but what it was is LAPD went out and terrorized them. And they went, nature abhorring a vacuum, they went looking for other places to be. And we had to encourage them that Oceanside was not the place for them to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they really spread out and looking for new territory. As you said, John, I agree with that. LAPD was putting a tremendous amount of pressure on them. And if you recall, Gates riding in the
tank.
in the armored vehicle with the battery, right?
Yeah,
and busting through some fortified crack houses is what he was doing. So those were the days. And,
although remember, we didn't call it crack back then; it was rock.
It was rock.
Right. We were slinging rock.
Yep.
And is what they did. And I see Billy was at Camp Pendleton between 81 and 86.
Thank you for your service.
I would imagine he would remember the Troiani murder.
Yeah, he may have.
Because 84 was when that happened. But anyway, 180 Canyon, lay down some more foundation for that, Chris.
Okay, so 180 Canyon was an apartment complex across from a McDonald's, and it was across the street, actually just down the street from what we used to call sterile housing. It was Sterling housing, where the average age of a Lance Corporal bag of donuts was probably 20 years old, and his wife was 15 to 17 average age. But 180 Canyon is, it's a double, two-story building.
The Centurion Apartments.
Yeah, they're what?
The Centurion Apartments.
Yeah, the Centurion Apartments. Okay, that's that. If you needed something and it was dope related, just go to 180 Canyon and you'd be good to go. So, what do you got on PCP over there? You guys roll into a call?
We were working morning watch, and I had a trainee with me, and this ordinarily I was not a training officer yet, but I forget the cop. His regular cop was sick, so they stick him with me. And I tell him, basically, you're a rookie, just shut up, sit in a car. And he looks at me and says, I'm ready for anything. Now, what do you respond to that? I mean, I told him, I've been doing this job 4 years longer than you, and I'm not ready for anything. So we go 10-8, which in cop lingo, which I'm going to probably will slide into, go in service. The minute we roll out of the police station, we get a call of a verbal dispute at 180 Canyon. So we, even though it wasn't our beat, they send us. And we get a half block down, and they update the call, and they say this turned into physical, that the husband is assaulting the wife. As I make the turn onto Canyon, it now turns into the husband is now armed with a knife, waving it around, threatening to kill the wife. And as we pull into the parking lot at 11 o'clock at night, people are running around screaming, "He's got a gun! He's got a gun!" I turn and look at this trainee, and it's deer in the headlights. And I say, "Ready for anything?" So as we go in, and we already got backup rolling, because I get on the air and go, "Hey, they say this guy's got a gun." As we go in, there's part of a sofa or furniture sticking through an apartment down on the first floor, and everybody's screaming. There's a guy crouched by the wall, and they're screaming, "He's shermed out! Look out! He's shermed out!" Which is an expression that he was under the influence of PCP, because the way you ingested PCP very frequently was to dip a Sherman's cigarette, which no longer exists, and then smoke the PCP.
They call them sherms.
And to be under the influence of PCP was to be shermed out. Now, parenthetically, this is an era before pepper spray, not that it would have worked. This is an era before tasers or less lethal rounds. It's flashlights or nightsticks, and most of us had gone to pet stores to buy impromptu dog leashes as hobbles, because none of the specialized equipment existed. So as we approach, and I have my gun out because everybody's screaming he has a gun, and I tell the guy, "Show me your hands, show me your hands," and he spins around and runs at me. And at the last second, I can see he is not armed. Well, he crashes into me and is growling like a rabid dog, and I'm attempting to fight him off, and I'm pistol whipping him. I'm using a large bore revolver to hit him on the head because, all right, the bystanders are right. He is under the influence of PCP. And the rookie is trying to get a hold on this guy, like he's going to do a wrestling hold. And I just tell him, start hitting this guy. Fortunately, backup arrives in the form of DJ Potts There's a name from the past. And Bob Gilliam. And we have to play the anvil chorus on this guy with nightsticks and flashlights. And we finally get him to the ground when I'm punched from behind in the back of the head by the wife, who has decided that she's going to jump in and rescue her old man.
Yeah, he's not going.
Yeah, he's not. So I didn't mean, look, I'm going to want to stress this. I didn't mean to knock her out because I didn't know who had punched me. So I threw a blow backwards, and rock'em sock'em robot, the head went back and she went down. That turned the crowd against us. So by this point, we've managed to get him handcuffed. We've plastic cuffed his, because we would carry plastic cuffs like they're using in the demonstrations now. But we went to Home Depot and got him. It's not like we got him from a police, this was stuff that wasn't purposed for law enforcement yet. So as we picked this guy up to carry him out, the mob decides they're going to free him. They're going to lynch him from us. And so as we're carrying them along, as we're carrying this guy along, this mob's trying to get close. And as we get to the parking lot, Rocket Man Donnelly's out there. He's a sergeant. And
we're going to have to qualify each of these characters. So
yeah, Rocket Man Donnelly he earned his name because he looked like he had jumped like Commando Cody at a scene. But we get out in the parking lot and everybody looks at me and they go, "Are you hurt?" Because we were still wearing the tan uniforms then. And I am covered in this guy's blood because he had cut his arms up on the glass. I mean, I look like a British soldier. And, but I remember Bob and DJ Potts coming to our rescue there. So I don't know if you remember that, Bob. That was.
Yeah. I think Daryl and I were working a plainclothes detail.
You were.
Yep. And so all we had was our stream lights or
Kel lights.
And I do remember that, John. So interesting. So the comment, one of the viewers commented or asked the question, don't PCP, we also called them dusters because of the angel dust connotation. So a duster typically would have pretty superhuman strength, whether it's male or female. They exhibited obviously inhuman behavior, and superhuman strength was one of the characteristics. They often would strip all their clothes off because one of the things that the drug does to them, it makes them feel extremely hot and like they're burning up. So they take their clothes off. And so it would be very common to get a radio call of a nude male or nude female walking down the middle of the street, busting windows out of parked cars and that kind of thing. And we knew right away we had a duster. So we would send, obviously, as many people as we could. And oftentimes, because these dusters were known to actually break handcuffs in a couple of situations, we would double handcuff them. So we would use 2 pair of handcuffs on a duster, just to be on the safe side.
We'd also carry a blanket and throw a blanket because bright lights would set them off. We throw a blanket over them.
Right.
Yeah. How many times would we never want to hit them in the face with a flashlight, right? Because they would just they're off to the races.
Yeah, exactly.
Scary.
Oh yeah, I'm glad we're over those days.
So
we're in fentanyl.
And today, I mean if we talk about what they're seeing on the street today, with fentanyl and just all of the tragedy that's taking place, so many lives are being lost in this country. I mean, last year I think we lost. I have to look at the exact number, but it was well over 100,000 people in the United States. I mean, think about that, right? I mean, all of us get that, because we've been there, done that, and seen it. But at the same time, if you take the Vietnam War, and we lost 58,000, good American soldiers in that war. I had a class recently where I wrote up on the board, 18 to 23,000. And I asked everybody, what is this number? And they didn't know. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to write this number. And I wrote 58,000. And you see all the hands go up as, oh, that's how many troops we lost in, Vietnam, approximately. And I said, well, that was over a 10-year period that those troops were lost. So this number here, 18 to 23,000, that's conservatively the Uniform Crime Index. If we multiply that 10 years, that's almost 230,000 people. This is the amount of homicides in the United States today. And then I asked them a question, and these were mostly young detectives. Where's the war? Where's the war today in this country? Sometimes we forget that what these men and women in blue are facing on a daily basis. I think this crew here, for our audience, we learned that this right here, which all three of us are using on this podcast, the ability to speak, was much more powerful than this, the ability to pull a trigger. Mm-hmm. And it's sad to see this idea of these young, kids out there. When I say kids, youngsters, I don't even know what to call them, to be honest with you, these young officers, where back in the day, you could pull off operations like this. And John, I'm going to let you tell everybody about this particular picture. And Bobby, you're going to probably crack up on this one. But when we would do operations like this, and this is Lee Stites and Riva.
Yeah,
and John's on the left. Give everybody a flavor of what this one looks like, John.
This was when I was a detective sergeant, and I had the detectives I had working for me. I gave them their heads. Okay, their styles of management, and police departments never lack for people, for supervisors who they want to control every item of behavior, how they act, with how their subordinates behave. Not that I could tell you anything about that, Chris. So my detectives, I told them, I want you to be imaginative. And so what happened is that we'd had there was a jewelry store in a neighborhood called Oceana, which was on the hill overlooking the San Luis Rey Valley. And we had a window smash burglary. And Riva De Nera, who is the detective on the far right wearing like the Hawaiian shirt, he's
an amazing artist too, by the way.
He is an extraordinary artist.
And he has a shop in, I think, the Bay Area. But he's got an art studio.
He is an extraordinary artist. But I've also found that cops who have secondary interests in like music or art, they tend to bring an additional dimension to their police work. At any rate, Riva had developed a lead on the suspect and had learned that he was working at the Goodyear tire shop on Oceanside Boulevard at what at the time was still South Hill Street. And they came up with an idea of we were going to try and rope him in we had heard that he was interested in committing other forms of crime. So the fellow in the middle with the bandana on his head, that's Detective Lee Stites, who had come to Oceanside from Azusa PD. And we got this Camaro from Rhetoric, and Lee dressed up like a parolee, and we put him on a wire, and we went down to the Goodyear, and Lee found this guy, and Lee spun a very convincing story that he had just been released from the state prison in Arizona, and that what he had learned to do there was work in the prison print shop, and that he had learned to print very convincing vehicle titles. He then points to the Camaro and says, that is stolen out of Phoenix, but I've changed the VIN, and I have got, and the VIN number being there, the numbers on the dashboard that identify that vehicle, and that he had printed a fake title and said that he needed somebody in North San Diego County who could handle the business of selling the cars. So this crook working at the tire shop immediately volunteers. I can do it. Yeah, I can do it. Oh man, this sounds so cool. So the detective tells him, well, you know, you're gonna have to pay for this car if you want, you know. And so they come up with an idea of they come up with a selling price of $200. Our criminal genius only has $26. So Lee Stites, the detective, takes the $26 and says, but you better pay me the other $174. Once the money has been transacted, what we have now is an attempt to purchase stolen property. Is it stolen property? No. But the way the law is written in California, our crook believes he's attempting to purchase stolen property. So the bus signal is given, we all appear, and Detective Stites looks at one of the other detectives, Detective Jim Wood, who later ended up being mayor of Oceanside, and continues the charade and says, oh no, it's my parole officer. Really, Mr. Wood, I was going to report, really? Everybody gets handcuffed. The crook goes to the station. Riva De Niro sits down with him, and the guy cops to being led astray. He was being led into temptation, not that this guy needed any help. Led into temptation by the evil parolee. Riva De Niro then pulls out a blank VHS tape, slides it across the table, and says, now why don't you tell me about the burglary of the jewelry store? The kid literally sags in his chair. Oh, you know everything about me. I guess I better confess. So he confesses to the burglary of the jewelry store. And then he says, well, before I go to jail, can I watch the video? Riva De Niro says, there's nothing on that tape. I gamed you. A moment later, the door opens up and Detective Stites leans in and goes, hey, hi. By the way, I'm a cop. This was, you know, we did this as a detective sergeant. We ran sting operations. I tried to make it as fun as I could for my subordinates.
Free pizzas.
Free
for warrant sweeps. Remember, Bobby? I've got one here from you. Here, let's tell everybody what we got going here on this one.
Oh yeah.
So Les Lang sent that to me a couple of years ago. He pinned that to my Facebook page a couple of years ago on my birthday, and that is in front of the Playgirl, if I remember.
Which was a nudie bar.
Yeah, and obviously the gentleman I'm attempting to get some information from there lost the fight inside the Playgirl, and there are a couple more. I don't have the photos, This was all impromptu for me tonight, so I couldn't get too many photos. But
No worries, but we've got a couple here. I see my buddy Frank on the left. Is that you on the right?
that's me on the right. It looks like we're getting ready to lead some kind of parade. That was circa 1983, I would say. That's about 83. So those are the days when I heard you guys talking about the pier earlier, right before I jumped in here. And Frankie and I would routinely ride our motors out onto the pier because we routinely have problems out there. People selling drugs and people drunk, and other crimes occurring out at the end of the pier. So that was a great way to get out there, and so we did, and we would routinely ride out there on the end of the pier.
And if you've just joined us, that's the pier that just was lit on fire on national news a couple of days ago. And the guy on the left there, Bob's on the right. I mean, you two look right out of Ponch and John. I mean, right out of the old Chips movies back in the day, But what I told everybody if you just got here in the very beginning, the guy on the left is who walked up and looked at my shoes, and you can tell why. John and I understand why. I mean, Bob and these motor guys, they just click to a whole different beat, a whole different vibe, and everything is pristine, everything. And the guy on the left, Frank Bruckner, my old TAC officer, walks up to me and he looks at my shoes and he goes, "What did you shine those things with a Hershey bar?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Another Frank Bruckner story.
Bruckner.
So about this same time period, Frank and I were sitting at the Denny's up on North Hill, just outside the entrance to the Oceanside Harbor. And also right there, just right next to the Denny's, is Marina Towers, which is what was at the time was the tallest building in the city, and may still be, I'm not sure. And we're sitting there and we're just finishing up our shift, and we're writing notes on the tickets that we had written during the shift, and just having a cup of coffee and winding down for the day. And we both look up and we could see the top of Marina Towers. Well, we both look up and lo and behold, there's a guy sitting over with his legs extended over the ledge of Marina Towers.
Wow.
And of course, our keen police minds told us that maybe this guy had suicide in mind. And sure enough, that's what he was trying to do. And so for the next 4 or 5 hours, Frank and I were on scene there. Frank actually went up into the towers and spent several hours talking the guy down, and was successful in doing that. And,
Frank also talked to a guy. He got the Medal of Valor, a guy out of the surf, right? Who was holding a family hostage.
Yeah. He. This was before our motor days. That was probably 1981, I think. And as you mentioned, the guy was in the surf, and he had taken a hostage out there in the surf, and had a knife. And Frank actually stripped down to his underwear.
Yeah.
And waded out into the surf and spent quite a bit of time talking this guy down, and was also successful in that endeavor. And nobody got hurt that I recall. And the victim was, of course, rescued. And that one, I think that one made national news in BC here. One of the three big ones back those days.
Yeah, that was an amazing situation. I mean, Frank's the real deal. It was, and the two of you are. I mean, it was, these are the times, again, folks, that we didn't have tasers, we didn't have, any of the tools that are available today that left lethal, items like the 40 millimeter cannon and all of that stuff. I mean, that stuff started to come in towards the end of the 90s and into, 2000, et cetera. But these are the kind of situations where literally you would get a radio call, you wouldn't know what you're going to roll into, and you had to use whatever kind of intelligence God had given you at that moment. And, so here's a good one here, Bobby. Tell us about this one. Hey, your bike has changed too. You were riding Kawasaki's in the first one.
Yeah, the first photo was the older version. This is also a Kawasaki 1000. This was the first year that they had added a fairing onto the bike, and I believe this was 82. I could be wrong. It might be 83. It's 82 or 83. And you can see the Ford Pinto station wagon in the background, just 78 freeway.
Chariots of Fire.
So, yeah, exactly. So our old colleague, rest in peace, Dave Grant, who was also working motors at the time, he had us all down there, and his lovely wife was out there, and she was somewhat of she was an amateur photographer, and she took a bunch of photos of us, and so we were kind of posing, and that's what I'm doing in this photo here, is just posing. But
there was just an event for Dave up in NorCal. Did you know about that? And Reno was up in Reno too, Bob. You guys know that?
No, I didn't know a thing about it. No.
Yeah, Richie was his wife.
Richie, yeah.
Yeah, and it anyway, they just honored him. For everybody that doesn't know, Dave was an amazing human being. He lateraled to Tuala County, I believe, in NorCal. And he died on duty up there. But so it was Dave's wife who was taking these photos. And boy, what a character, a rodeo guy.
Oh, yeah, he's a real deal. He's a good cowboy.
He was a real good cowboy.
And, when he would also do some moonlighting in construction sites. And one night we had a rollover crash on North River Road, like heading out toward Bonsall, that isolated 2-lane section. He had a car on his roof, and Interreading, which was the local towing company, we had several tows, they couldn't get the car flipped over. So Dave said, hang on a second. And he drove to a construction site and brought a big construction machine over, and drove up in the middle of the night, picked the car up, and flipped it over.
Oh, I love it.
Well, back in those days, we had to be resourceful.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the viewers just mentioned about I think Kung Fu Panda just mentioned in the comments about SDPD, San Diego PD, and what they're carrying on their motors now. Yeah, and it's come a long way. The only thing I had, the only weapon that I had with me was my handgun, of course. And then you can't see it here, but there's a right up at the front crash bar running horizontal at the bottom of the fairing is my Coca-Cola wood nightstick, which is clamped onto the bike. And so I had that, and I was carrying a revolver at the time, a Model 19 Smith & Wesson, and that's the only weapon. So no shotguns on the back, no rifles on the back, none of that.
So Bobby, here's a question for you on motor. What's the craziest police chase you've ever been in?
It was back in that era on that bike that you see right there. And it was a BMW I can't remember if it was a 318 or 320i that I chased all over South Oceanside, into Carlsbad, back into Oceanside. And I think my top speed was 110 on Carlsbad Boulevard. Chased them all the way down to La Costa Avenue. And it was just for speed. And back in those days, we would chase them until the wheels fell off. It didn't matter if it was a failure deal. Nowadays, I think perhaps we're a little smarter than that, and we probably wouldn't chase that just for speed. But there are a lot of factors that go into that decision today. But back then, we would chase them until the wheels fell off. Fortunately, I never laid my police bike down. Years later, I would lay down a personal motorcycle in Colorado when I was on a trip with some other cops, but never laid that bike down. Came close a couple of times, rolling through intersections with lights and siren and people not yielding, but fortunately I kept the shiny side up, as they say.
So do you guys ever watch any cop shows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My personal favorites were the old NYPD Blue, that whole series, and I thought those were great.
Reno 911, which was far closer to reality than most people realize, because they talked like when you hear a character say, "I ain't cutting paper on this," which was an expression for "I'm not writing a report on this." But actual like realistic cop programs, no, they drive me nuts.
Yeah, I don't watch very much either. But
I don't watch a lot of TV anymore, but if I the last cop series I watched was the old reruns of NYPD Blue, and I thought they were great.
Yeah, I mean, today it's, I watched TV the other night where they were clearing off the campuses and stuff, for some of the things that are going on there. And I thought, holy cow, what's going on with these guys? Go ahead.
John and Chris, do we dare tell a Buford story?
Everybody can tell one.
Okay, let me tell one real quick, and then
lay the foundation though for Buford. You got to lay the foundation for him.
So Buford, the guy we call Buford, his name is Don Stokes, and Don was I don't know, about 5'8" maybe. That might be generous. 5'7", 5'8".
Yeah, walking short.
Yep. And he had a bald head. He had a huge baloney patch, and always kept his hair long on the sides. And Buford was quite the guy. He was very intelligent. He hailed from Oklahoma, I believe.
Yes.
So he had a bit of an Oklahoma accent, and he had been in. Was he in the Marine Corps or was he in the Army? I can't remember.
I don't remember which. I don't think he was in the Marine Corps.
Okay,
but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Anyway, he did. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was the Navy. He was in the Navy, and that's how he ended up out here. He got discharged in the Navy in San Diego. So anyway, he was quite the character. He went on after the Navy, and he got a master's degree in journalism. So the guy could write. He was a very intelligent guy. But he always kind of pushed the envelope a little bit, and quite the reputation, and he was just funny as hell. And so I worked graveyard with Buford for several years, and one night we're sitting in roll call at 10 p.m. and they're going over all the crimes that occurred the previous day, the previous shifts. And earlier that evening, before we came on duty, a night shift officer had been shot at out on North River Road, out by the back gate of Camp Pendleton. And the suspect, he went out on the suspect. He was going to make a pedestrian stop on this guy, and the guy ran off and then turned and fired a number of rounds at him. And so then he ran down into a ravine, and I haven't been out on North River Road in forever, but back then it was very rural, and I think they called in the sheriff's helicopter, and they did a search for the guy, and they didn't find him. So they're telling us about this incident in the roll call, and Buford is sitting in the back row of the briefing room. And back then you could still smoke in the briefing room. And Buford had a fondness for cigars, so he would always have a cigar either lit or chomping on one in the back, and he always kicked his military style boots up onto the table in the back of the briefing room. And so there was a lull right after they got through telling us about this, the officer being fired on. And so Buford leans back and he goes, and he takes the stogie and he kind of smokes it a little bit, and he says, "Well, I'll tell you boys one GD thing. If that son of a bitch had shot at me like that, they'd have had to send Bill Cox out with a street trooper to pick up my brass." Bill Cox was the custodian at the police department, or what? Not a custodian. He was in charge of.
He was the maintenance.
Yeah.
I mean, he was in charge of the facility. Yeah. Baby. Now, can I tell a Stokes story?
Go.
Bob is absolutely correct. Don was brilliant, and he was a really great cop. But one night there was an armed robbery, a 211, a radio call of a 211, which is an armed robbery in California, at the Shell station, 600 North Hill Street. And Dan Aarons was the first officer on scene, and he sees the suspect vehicle pull away. As Dan's doing a turnaround, Don Stokes jumps on the suspect vehicle, and they're in pursuit southbound on Hill Street, heading toward the city of Carlsbad. I was working in Eastern Indiana. Yeah. He's chasing, it's a Cadillac with two suspects and a gun was seen. This was a full-on righteous armed robbery. Stokes is in pursuit with the unit right behind him being Dan Aarons, who is another great cop. I was working the 6 beat, so I was down to the South City limits, and I kind of drift in the direction of the pursuit, thinking, okay, if they get to like the 78 freeway, I can get involved. Right about at one point, Stokes comes on the air and says, "Station O." I think I might have winged me a pedestrian at Vista Way and Hill.
Yes.
Send a unit to check. I'm still in pursuit.
That's right.
So what he's basically done is come on the air and confess to a felony hit and run, possibly a vehicular homicide. So I get on TAC 2 and I tell the sergeant, I go, "Yeah, I'll check on that." So I get to the intersection. I don't see any roadkill. So I get on the air and go, "Yeah, negative on any pedestrians that have been winged." I guess the pursuit ended up in Carlsbad where the suspect vehicle crashed. One of the guys jumped out and Stokes opened fire on him, and that just made the guy run faster. But they eventually caught both suspects. But to my dying day, I will never forget, I might have winged me a pedestrian. Now, 95 miles an hour. Yeah.
I was directly involved in that pursuit. I was right behind Frank Bruckner in that chase, and I remember that like it happened yesterday. That's funny.
And see, now you're hearing this now to your viewing audience. If you were hearing this from like one cop, you could be forgiven for saying, "Oh, they're making this stuff up." But you're seeing how our stories dovetail. I got to tell you something, and I know you guys will agree with me on this. Working as a cop in the era we came in was the most fun you could have with your clothes on.
That's right.
It was, I mean, I felt there were nights when I should have been paying them to go out and doing what I was doing.
I agree.
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Bobby.
Absolutely, especially in the 80s. I thought, for me personally, the 80s was a great decade for policing, and it was very challenging. But what a great decade that was, for a number of reasons. But
And look at these two hoodlums. So this is John DeRowan over on the right, and John
Rich DeRowan.
Rich, excuse me, Rich, and John Lamb on the left. Johnny,
yes, that's me.
With the fedoras, sir.
Sunglasses. Yeah. At that point, our nicknames were, they called DeRowan Pharaoh because he looked like Pharaoh. And I was called Lex because apparently it was believed that I behaved like Lex Luthor, being played by Gene Hackman from the original Superman film.
That's an awesome picture, bro.
That is a great picture.
You look like the Blues Brothers. You know,
we were full service, and we valued the community.
Yeah, this is awesome. Just absolutely good stuff. So I want to show the audience this one real fast. So this is the 1st Marine Division returning from the first Gulf War. And they put everybody in uniform that day for the parade. And Johnny, you were down under the pier, right?
You were up on the main parade route, and I was down with a special reaction force just in case things went south. I was a sergeant by that point, and I was down underneath the pier.
And so this is a young me a couple of weekends ago. And now the interesting thing is when these Marines came down Hill Street, that was an amazing experience. And they put everybody out in uniform. It didn't matter what assignment you had, except for the motors, of course. Bob knows that the motors always, are running in the static in the front and, keeping security. And our guys, we would just kind of line the parade route. But the funny thing about this one is that night when everything was done, i.e. everybody was dismissed, I ended up arresting the first tank driver into Kuwait City for getting into a fight out in town at one of those special little bars that we showed you earlier. And the poor kid ended up, pulling a knife on a guy, but it was a pretty interesting time. But this is when I think Boomer, General Boomer from the 1st Marine Division, led this parade here, and that's him second. And I think we got one more coming up here. Hang on. Bob just sent me another one, so I'm going to pull this one up. Oops. Oh, there it is. Hang on, Bobby. I'm trying to get it. Oh, there it is. Oops. Sorry, I know I'm talking to myself. Should see me drive.
I have. It's DWO, driving while old.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to pull this one up. Bobby, what do we got here?
That's to your point just a moment ago. He's saying the motors always led the parades. This is 4th of July parade, 82, 83, maybe 84, something like that. Mm-hmm. Not sure which. And you guys remember the police car in there, the old Dodge Diplomat.
Oh, God, yes. And the sound when those 8 cylinders went, wow, woo.
Now, I heard a story that some of the cops would, at the beginning of their shift, would open the hood on those Dodge Diplomats and take the air cleaner cover and turn it over so it created a little air gap in there, and it would make it sound pretty awesome. Now, I don't know who would do that, but I
can't imagine.
A couple of times.
Yeah, I've heard those stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, whoever it was, they were probably breaking the rules, and I'd report them.
Remember when Cosmo put a sunroof?
I was there that night. Oh, yeah. Lord.
And Hank the next day came in, wanted to know who put the sunroof in the.
Yeah.
And tell the story, John.
We were just coming off shift, and ordinarily when you get to the police parking lot, you relax a little bit, because when you're out in the field, and I know you guys will bear me out on this, you're alert to everything, but you relax a little bit when you get to the police station, and gates close and everything. And so we were taking my stuff out of the cop car, and the way cops began the shift is you were to take the shotgun out of the rack, disassemble it, make sure it was unloaded, disassemble it, make sure that the firing pin worked, because firing pins will break on the shotguns, and then reassemble the shotgun, reload it, put it back in the police car. Well, some lazy boys will just lean forward and pull the trigger. So as I'm getting my stuff out of the car, I hear boom, and portions of my body are puckering, because we think we're all under fire. And we turn around, and Charlie Constantino gets out of the car and looks at us, and you can see the hole he had fired around right through the roof of the cop car.
Yeah.
And there you mentioned Hank and Nick.
Yeah, Hank comes in the next morning, because I was working days at that time. Hank comes in, because remember, all you had to do was write it up on a sheet, right? And put it in the commander's office. And then Hank and Nick would come get the sheet and, go fix whatever needed to be fixed. I remember him walking in and go I can't remember who the supervisor on duty was, but anyway, he goes, can I ask a question? And everybody looks over. Yeah, well, what's up, Hank? He goes, who put the sunroof in unit whatever it was last night? And we're like, we don't know. I mean, why are you asking? Okay, because nobody's copping to it just yet. And we have to find out who did it. Anyway, they knew, the lieutenant knew or the night watch, or the morning watch lieutenant knew, what time it was. But
remember, when the units were white, you could fix scratches with whiteout.
Oh.
Because we wrote all our reports in ink, and you get whiteout. So if you get a scratch on your white cop car, whiteout would make the scratch go away.
Yes, it would. I got one coming up here. Hang on. All right, this is an old crew.
Oh my!
How about this one, Bob? And who's still with us? I'm just going to zoom in here. So remember the time. So this dispatcher here was Teresa White. We absolutely she love her. And here's her husband over here, John. So we were messing with him one night, and we put these signs out all along through the city and morning watch to Sister Teresa and Brother White's soup kitchen. They're coming into work the next morning together, and they're passing all these signs that say Sister Teresa, Brother John's soup kitchen. And those are the kind of things we could do, right? I mean, we had such camaraderie, and we loved each other. But so Ron's gone.
How about loading up the air vents of a cop car with all the holes you punch from paper, and then leaving, so when you turn the unit on, the fan was on full and blue paper. Yeah.
And this one here, remember when we filled up Whitbread's, we used to call him Potato Head, and we filled his locker with like 10 bags of potatoes. One guy held it open, and the other guys poured them all in, and he came into work to put his uniform on, opened it, and all these potatoes come falling out onto his locker, and it was like, oh my gosh, that was a story. Yeah. But we can tell some war stories here. This is our dear friend in the back, Larry Fomino.
Yeah.
Larry's passed away. We love him to death. I remember Larry and I got a call of a drunk guy in the middle of the street. Anyway, we get there. Larry's behind him, and I'm in the front, and this guy just sucker punches me, and absolutely, just I saw the birds, the whole thing going down, and I hit the deck, and I remember looking up, and he's a huge Samoan. How tall was he? About 6'4"?
About 6'4". He was like a Coke machine with arms.
Yeah, a Coke machine with arms. Exactly. And Larry's got this guy off of the ground, and he's in a chokehold at that time, a carotid hold, which we could do back in the day. And he hooks this guy up. He leans over to me. He goes, "You okay, little buddy?" I go, "Kong, you're amazing. I love you, bud." And he pulls me up. I jump on him. Anyway, we hook this guy up. But that's Larry. That's just one story that I have, and we have hundreds of stories with each of these guys.
Larry was great. I remember the morning Chuck Whalen's bike went down. I had to roll
right
out there.
Here's Chuck right here when he was a sergeant.
Yeah, he was out on Mission Avenue, and you never want to hear that. It came out. We used an 11 code. They did try to state of 1180 motorcycle, and then they came out and said it was one of our officers. There's Ron Shed.
Ron is over here, and this is just one squad. Everybody, there's a whole bunch of other people, but this is Ron. He's gone.
Yeah.
Graf. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Graf.
Sergeant Grapefruit.
Oh, Shed's behind him. Yeah, I see Ron back there. I didn't see him in the background. Sorry.
Is that Mike Goldsmith?
That's Goldfish right behind Graf.
Over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ed Selby.
He's gone.
Behind him.
Frenchie. Phil Dumas. Film at 11.
Yes.
Kevin, who I love Kevin. We just went to his son's wedding recently.
That's
John,
right.
we just talked about, and of course Sean Sully. He's traveling the country with his sweet wife. Gordon McCormick, one of the funniest guys you will ever meet in your entire life. Rest in peace. He's gone. He's gone. This is Mike Shirley. We used to say, "My name is Mike. Don't call me Shirley."
Dave Larson.
Dave Larson, a.k.a.
Beaker. That was his nickname, Beaker.
Nickname. I don't know who that guy is. It looks like me, but this is Potato Head here. Brian Whitbread, Petey Kopic, and
Pete,
then
one hell of an artist.
Pete is, yeah, he is.
One hell of an artist.
Yes,
he worked for Disney before he came on the police department. Disney.
Yeah, and he's from England.
Yeah.
He's from England. Just a super amazing human being.
And John Bart, I'll get you on the radio. I'll get you on the radio. The radio.
And Pat Boatman.
Yep.
Pat Boatman, yeah.
Yep. And then Teresa. And then Ron. So we're going to leave the story for Ron. Bobby, what do you got on Ron?
Okay. All right. So you mentioned earlier how geographically large Oceanside is. It's just under 50 square miles. And on the way out east, so inland from the coast, up in the hills, but still within the city limits, is strawberry farms, avocado ranches, etc. Very agriculture. And Ron befriended some of the strawberry farmers out there, and one of them in particular, the Yukigawa brothers, if you remember.
Yeah.
I do. Them and Mitch Nagata was the other one who grew.
Yeah. So one afternoon, we're all working motors. It's me, Ron, Mean Gene Fernandez, Frankie Bruckner, Dave Grant, and the whole crew. And we're getting off duty, and we're at the police department, and we're all out by our motors getting ready to leave. And nobody knew where Ron Shed was. So we're trying to call him on the radio, and he responded, so we knew he was okay, but he didn't want to tell us where he was. So we waited and waited and waited, and he comes about 10 minutes later. He comes rolling into the back lot of the police station, right here where the photo was taken, and the saddlebags of his Kawasaki 1000 were dripping with this red gooey stuff coming out of the saddlebags. Well, Gene Fernandez walked up to him and is laughing, and he goes, "Oh, you've been out to the strawberry fields, huh?" And it was a hot day, really hot day. And so I didn't know it was possible for a strawberry to actually melt into a liquid. But he had loaded up both saddlebags full of fresh strawberries from the Yankee Dollar Brothers and tried to roll around the city with, it was like 95 degrees out in Oceanside. And he just ruined them all and dripping. And he had in his motor. And it soaked all of his paperwork and his ticket books and everything. It was funny.
That was awesome.
I've got some other stories, but they're probably not fit for
YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Same thing with Buford. I could sit here all night and tell you stories about Buford. But,
yeah, that's the one thing that. Well, here's one, a quick one. Remember we talked about Danny Aarons earlier. This is Danny here.
Oh yeah.
John, tell everybody about this picture.
This photograph, I want to say, was taken in '94. There was the city was sponsoring a trivia contest, and it was big doings as far as the city was concerned. And there were like 24 teams from all over Oceanside, the library, Miracosta College, various organizations and city departments. And our team was Chris on the right, me in the middle, and Dan Aarons on the left. And as we started out in this, everybody thought that the cops would be out by the first round because, of course, we're just dumb cops. And we ended up winning the trivia contest, and the librarian said, "I knew we were going to win. We knew the cops were going to win." One of the questions was, and for anybody who's any of your viewers here who have read the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, the question was, what is the fourth book in the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy trilogy? And I knew that one.
You knew the answer.
And it's the restaurant at the end of the universe. No, that's not. It's so long, and thanks for all the fish. We were the only ones to get that right. But what put us over the top was Chris was able to name all 4 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yep.
We won.
I don't think I could do it today. Donatello, Raphael, Leonardo, and who's the fourth? Anyway, I knew it then. I knew it that night for some reason. I knew it that evening. But how fun is that?
Well, it's no surprise you guys won that trivia contest, because I know all 3 of you very well, and a lot of wisdom and knowledge right there sitting at that table. Even though you are drinking beer, I presume.
John,
not me. That would be wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got one photo left here. I'm going to put this one up. You guys are going to remember these guys, and we're going to talk about these guys real fast. These are the dog guys.
There's Cubby.
Yep. So this
story, if we have time.
He hated that name.
Oh, I know.
And then Al. We love Al. We love
Leo.
Cubby.
And I have a story about Al too. If you
hit me.
Oh,
hit
he's
it.
great.
Okay, real quick. So Al Sherwood, he wasn't a sergeant then, but he later went on to be, I believe, sergeant in the K-9 unit.
Yeah.
So I knew Al from my days when I first started out in law enforcement in San Marino, California, up between Los Angeles and Pasadena. Al and I worked there. We both were cadets there and went on to be police officers there. San Marino was not a big city, was not, although it had its moments, not a lot of activity, nothing like Oceanside. Al lateraled up to Pasadena and was a Pasadena cop and a detective and worked at Pasadena, I think about 12 years or so before he came to Oceanside. So as he's contemplating, now I had since gone to Oceanside, so he was contemplating making a move, getting out of crazy Los Angeles area and coming south to Oceanside. And I was working day shift patrol, and Al came down to do a ride along with me on day shift in Oceanside. It was a weekday. It wasn't particularly busy, but we handled maybe 10 or 12 radio calls. And that was fine with me because I was getting to show him around the city. So we're coming to the end of the shift, and all of a sudden a radio call comes out of a burglary in progress in South Oceanside on one of the north-south streets. I don't remember which. So we get there, and sure enough, just like an old Adam 12 scene, two guys are bailing out of a window of the house in question, and they see the black and white, and they take off running. Now Al's in plain clothes because he's not an Oceanside police officer. He's just considering coming there, but he's armed with a gun, and he's just in plain clothes. And so I'm trying to catch up with these guys driving down an alley, and they're kicking it pretty good. A couple of young guys, and they're moving pretty good. So we get to a point to the end of an alley, and they split up. One went to the right, the other went to the left. So I bail out, and I take the guy going to the left, and instinctively Al bails out. Now, he's not an Oceanside police officer, but he's done this a million times as a Pasadena cop. He bails out, and long story short, we end up catching both our suspects, putting together a good burglary case. And that was Al's introduction to the city of Oceanside and the Oceanside Police Department.
And he's like, I'm lateraling tomorrow.
Yeah, long after that. Yeah. So
I see another great cop here too, Johnny D.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I got a Johnny D story.
Johnny D is third from the end of the right.
Johnny D is right here.
D.
He is right.
Coolest human being that ever lived.
He is one of the best human beings that ever lived, ever, and he's still with us. But he's from the Bronx. Where's he from?
He's from Bronx,
and he's Puerto Rican, and he's the funniest guy you could ever imagine. You know what I'm thinking? It wasn't Johnny. It was Larry Ocampo that I was just thinking of when he was using the bathroom down at the DSP downtown. Mm-hmm. And somebody threw an M80 underneath the building, and he was on the John when it happened, and he comes, rolling out, 1199 shots fired. And we're all like, chill, dude. It's just an M80, man. But Johnny Diaz is one of the funniest guys you'll ever meet in your life. And he talks like, yo, dude.
Very dry.
Yeah,
he was working for me when I was a patrol sergeant, and he had a trainee that he referred to as Eddie Haskell. For those who remember Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver, the suck up, the sort of, gee, Mrs. Cleaver, beautiful pearls. And whenever his trainee would start to talk, Johnny D always had a cigarette in his mouth, and he'd look at him and go, Eddie, I told you to shut up. I don't want to hear your voice. See, but Eddie, now what do I have to do to get your attention?
Yep.
Oh, he was a great cop.
He's just a good cop. And Kaiser, this dog here was Tommy. He's Belgian Malinois, And we had a whole bunch of Malinois. Well, we had three. Mata had one, Kevin had one, and then Johnny D had a Malinois. But this dog here, Tommy, we got a roll. We got a call on a stolen car, and the suspect had bailed down by the Carlsbad Lagoon. And as this was me next to Kevin, so whenever we rolled on a call together to a canine, they always sent a second canine officer just in case the dog needed to be, if something happened to the handler, then there would be a second handler there, hopefully, that the dog was familiar with. Because this dog here, Tommy, was absolutely nuts. In our business, guys, in terms of what we call it 5150. And that's the police term in California for wackadoodle.
Yeah, Welfare and Institutions Code section where we take people to the county bug house.
Yeah, so we get there. The suspect bailed. Patrol says, "Yeah, we last saw him going that way." And so back then, you'll notice there's no windows or no bars or anything on the back windows of the canine unit. It was just a piece of skid tape. So the dogs would, habitually stand on the skid tape here, and you just, on patrol, just drive around, and the dog would be sticking their heads out the window barking at people. Anyway, Kevin gets there. I'm there with him as his cover, and he gives the announcement, we're going to send the dog. He lets Tommy go. And that dog goes out probably about 50 yards, literally 50 yards, comes back, and now he's about, 20 yards, 15 yards, and all of a sudden he goes behind a rock. And this big boulder. And we see him, and he's doing this. You know how dogs, when they grab something and they start pulling? And Kevin's like, doggone it, I've been having problems with him with rabbits and this kind of garbage. And, and I'm looking at him, and he calls him out, Tommy, out. And Tommy jumps off, goes right back and starts doing this again. And I said to him, Kev, I think he's got a bad guy. And not a word. You can't hear anything, right? And you guys know it's pitch black. It's silent. It's like 2 a.m. Can't hear a thing. Nothing. And he goes, well, let's go up. And so we start walking up. We get up there, and sure enough, he's got this suspect by the back of his quad, the back quad on his leg, and he has pulled this guy about 1.5 feet. And the suspect had his face in the dirt, right? And you could tell that he was screaming, but he did not want us to find him. And man, we call him out, and I looked down at his leg, and it was like, oh man, that's not good. You're going to need a ride to the hospital, mister. But Kevin and I were in shock that this guy did not scream one time, and Kevin leans over to him and he goes, dude, he says, you must be one tough hombre. I thought, yeah, with Tommy. I saw Tommy go through a back window after a suspect in a car. He broke the window, went right through. And I was like, well, that's going to leave a mark. That's going to be a showstopper inside. And he ate that guy up. Go ahead, John.
You remember Zach.
Oh, the big Zach attack.
Zach was Beelzebub's service dog.
Yes, he was.
I got bit by Zach once.
Yeah.
I was covering Jack Resner, where the old First Interstate Bank was on Mission Avenue.
Yep.
And I went wide around the car, and I got chomped on my arm. I thought I'd been shot. It hurt that bad. And I thought, whoa, they're right. You don't hear the shot. And I looked down, and Zach has gone accordioned himself back into the car. I looked down, and I got blood running down, and I had a ride along from Miracosta. So I walked up to Jack, Jack Resner, who was the canine handler for Zach. He looks at me and he goes, hey, dude, you're bleeding. Yeah. Actually, Jack, I am. Your dog bit me. Oh, well, you need to be more careful next time.
I was with Jack at in front of the Normandy one night on a clearing out the bar, and this gal took a swing at him, and Zach came out of the car, and it was a bite into the stomach of this person, and I remember Jack, pulling Zach off of her, and we lifted up her shirt, and literally about a half inch of human flesh was gone. And the dog, Zach, sitting down, he calls him out, and Zach's sitting there, and he goes like that. And Jack's like,
that was that.
Let me see that. I'm like,
that was shortly before that happened. After we got called, George Wallner went to a large, as we called him, Furious George.
Old George, yep.
George had been a combat Marine in Vietnam, and George was you didn't mess with George.
I'm going to show you a picture of George, and I'm in it too, but just ignore me. This is George right here.
Yeah, George is right there. Yeah, George. He had arrested. He'd been sent to a loud party call, and there were a bunch of Marines in the front yard. This was like, I don't know, North Ditmar, one of the apartment complexes. And George grabbed one of the Marines who'd been urinating into a flower bed, and he was just going to secure the Marine to the gate. Well, alcohol, this party group decides they're going to rescue their pal. So they come running downstairs. They rush George. They get their pal out of the cop car and run him up to the apartment. Now, this is not probably the wisest thing to do, because you've run upstairs, like, we know where you are. The cavalry comes. We all assemble around Jack Resner with Zach. And there's a Marine standing at the top of the stairs who's had too much to drink, and like every basically intoxicated Marine we encountered, he's force recon. He announces that, which is like the equivalent of Navy SEAL. It's the Marine Commandos. Everybody we encountered, if they had too much to drink, I'm force recon, I'll rip your windpipe out. And so Jack says, dude, you need to clear the doorway, or we're going to send the dog up, and the dog's going to chomp you. And this guy says, send your dog. Oh, kill it. Kill it with my bare hands. And I never forget, Jack was just very, very matter of fact, says, okay, I just want you to remember you asked for this to happen. Zach begins to go up the stairs and jumps as if going high. The guy moves to block, and Zach changes directions in midair and chomps the Marine in an area that for males they'll find extremely painful. And they hit the ground, they hit the stairs. The Marine begins to hit the dog, which is really an error. Pro tip to anybody who comes in contact with a police dog, don't hit the dog.
Pro tip.
Because the dog Zach then begins wrenching back and forth, doing his best to basically geld the Marine. When they finally let go and we run upstairs, this guy is laying sobbing and wants us to check if certain equipment is still present. And one of the officers, a cruel officer, looked down and said, "Oh no, it's gone." The Marine begins to cry, and then the cop says, "Nah, I'm just yanking your chain."
We're kidding.
But this was Zach.
How about the guy over on Center Street that was capping rounds and he came downstairs with a bib overalls on, and he had looked like a grenade. And
yes, I remember that.
And Resner sends Zach and hits him. And when Zach hits him in the chest, he pops it and it drops into his overalls. And it was a phosphorus grenade, red phosphorus, and he was on fire, right? Literally, he was on fire, and the dog and Zach is eating him, and we're trying to get the dog out, and the guy is burning, and they're rolling him. And I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It was right out of the movies. And just to kind of lay the foundation for the public here, this guy was shooting a rifle at the cops in the neighborhood and all this other stuff. And he finally, they weren't sure if he ran out of bullets or what happened, but anyway, he comes out onto the patio and he starts coming down these stairs, and he's got these bib overalls on with no shirt underneath. And he's just yelling at everybody, and the police dog goes in and hits him up top, and he had this phosphorus grenade, which is basically a canister that they use in the military. And by the way, stolen off of Camp Pendleton, of course, right? And because that's the other thing, working in a military town, we had a lot of stuff like that every once in a while. Oh, yeah. Anyway, this thing pops the moment Zach hits him, and he drops it, but he's unaware that initially that his thing was hanging out too wide, right down into his overalls, and it was like, oh my gosh, this poor guy. And
Chris, remember the Brook Street sniper, the guy that was, they convinced him to come down to the airport taxi, separate incident altogether. Just give you an idea of how crazy Oceanside was. It was Brook Street. I forget the guy's name, but he had a .22 rifle and he was shooting at everybody. And eventually they convinced him that, hey, you want to go to Cuba? Because this guy was, this guy crazy he hadn't used yet. So he didn't know what he wanted. And so the negotiator was Tom Bussey, and he says, hey, you want to go to Cuba? Yeah, sounds great. Okay, yeah, let's go to Cuba. So they bring up one of those extended airport limos, but it's full of our canines. So this,
I don't remember this.
We're talking about like 82. This guy comes downstairs with his rifle under his arm and his suitcases, and his suitcases are full of the stuff from his refrigerator. Maybe he took a tip from Ron Shedd with the strawberries. He's got all this frozen food in his suitcase, and he is going to Cuba. And he opens up the door to the car, and 3 dogs just jump him. And so, they rip him up. They try to take him to jail. Vista Detention Facility says he's too crazy for us. So they take him down to the county screw factory in San Diego. Sorry, the mental health facility. And they want to get him rethreaded. They don't even keep him long enough to give him a shot of Thorazine. They just say he's not crazy enough to be here. The following day, this Looney Tunes comes to the police station and says, could I have my rifle back?
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
the dogs got him.
I'm gonna ask Bob on this one. Did you ever have as a motor, did you ever have a run-in with the Hells Angels?
Not a run-in, not in Oceanside. If we saw any outlaw motorcycle gangs coming through the city, we would tail them and basically harass them until they left town. We'd follow them.
You didn't fly your colors in Oceanside. That's
right. If they're flying colors. Now, if they weren't flying colors, we were constitutionally policing as we should. So we're not going to harass them. But if they're flying colors, they're free game. That means that they're out capering. They're doing something. But let me bring something up. John mentioned Cuba, and you both will remember these guys. So in 1981, Fidel Castro emptied out the prisons in Cuba. And we had some of you old timers listening in tonight will remember this. We had the Mariel boat lift.
Yeah, Marielitos.
Yeah, Marielitos. And so a number of them landed in Oceanside, ended up in Oceanside. Now, most of them went, to Miami. And so they arrived in Oceanside land-wise, hopping trains or however they got here. But we ended up with a number of them. And they were some of the most vicious criminals that we encountered back in the early 80s on the streets of Oceanside. And we identified them because they all had a tattoo on the lower inside portion of their lip. You remember that, John?
It was referred to. We lipped them.
Yep, and we referred to them as
tattoo number off their inside of their lower lip.
That's right. Yep. So if you go to prison in Cuba, you get tattooed on the lower lip. Let me just comment on one thing. It reminded me, John, you said that if somebody had secured a drunk Marine back to the base. Well, that's something that we did on a nightly basis. If you work patrol in Oceanside every night, a handful of Marines are going to go back to the base without charges, without any criminal charges.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they'd had a little too much to drink. And the last thing we wanted to do was charge them and get them in trouble with their unit. So on the border of Camp Pendleton near sterilized housing, actually it was in sterilized housing, there was a gate on Lemon Street.
Lemon Street gate.
And so, of course, if you've got a drunk Marine and you're in downtown Oceanside, you tell the dispatcher on the radio, 605, I'll be en route with a lemon. So, you remember those?
I do.
Oh yeah, en route with one.
Remember when there was a town patrol?
Yep.
There was a white van that was occupied by a Marine gunnery sergeant and a lance corporal, and we called it the Vomit Comet.
Yep.
Because you're drunks to it. And that stopped shortly, call it March of 1982. But there was, you didn't even need to drive to the base. And you'd get on the air and you go, yeah, 602, can I get a Vomit Comet to come to this location?
How about Tino? When he would come up, he'd go, 832, I got a live one here, stand by. And there'd be a, remember?
And 832, or Tino, so does he need some ham and eggs?
Yeah. He just,
Explain.
Can you let the jail know I got a live one? I'm en route.
Explain who Tino was.
Was a Samoan chief. He was a retired Marine, and he was a Samoan chief.
Yes.
And Tino had a very basic view of how to modify human behavior, and he referred to it as being ham and eggs.
Yep.
And which never failed to modify a person's behavior.
Well, and what about the Goon Squad on Friday nights? Mm-hmm. And what was the vehicle? Who was it? It was Dave Armour, Larry Falmina. Who else were the other two?
Well, it was Armour and Falmina. They were a pair there for quite a while.
They were big boys.
When I got there, those two were 10-8 on the streets every night doing their thing.
And one thing to understand, if you're just joining us, remember back in those days, on a Friday night, we really didn't take a lot of Marines to jail. We just secured them with what we call an FI, to either the MPs, or we take them to the front gate or whatever. But all they wanted to do was fight. And it was a fight because they were drunk, and, that's what Marines do. And that's what any good serviceman would do back in that time. And, but they wouldn't hurt each other, meaning there was no guns, there's no knives, none of that stuff. There was just fisticuffs. And, you'd break them up, and sometimes, you just say, okay, everybody, it's over. Keep moving.
Remember, it was called PRing.
Yeah.
Public release.
Yeah. Public relations. Exactly. PR. Oh, but what about the time that Manford handcuffed him around the light pole down at third and Tremont?
Manfred stories.
Third and Tremont. Do you guys remember that one?
I do.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Remember when Manfred handcuffed the guy to his cop car?
Well, to the handle.
Yeah, it had the passenger in the car who keeps saying, "Officer, you need to stop. Officer." Manfred keeps saying, "Shut up." And he goes, "I just don't think that dude handcuffed to the car can keep up much longer."
And remember, he gets in, and the other crook looks at him and says, "Man, you must be a track star." The first story, it was just big Donnybrook, and these drunk Marine, this Lance, whatever he was, Lance Corporal Bagadonis, Manford hooks him up around a light pole, right? He puts his arm around the pole and he hooks the cuffs on him, and he runs back into the fight. And anyway, the shift ends, and Manford's back at the station in the locker room changing, and he goes, I forgot something. And so all of a sudden it hits him. This guy is still handcuffed around the pole.
He's still sitting downtown handcuffed.
So he takes off back down to 3rd and Tremont, and this Marine is just still passed out next to the pole where he unhooks him. He says, get out, have a good day. You're like, oh my gosh, Manford, how did you forget that guy? It's busy night.
We used to call them Manford capers.
Yeah, Manford capers. Oh my goodness.
Rest in peace, Manford.
Yeah, rest in peace. God bless him. He was a great, great human being. And he ended up doing tours in the harbor, on a little boat before he passed away. He passed away from cancer. So, God bless him. We love him. We really do. What great memories. Well, okay, I got a couple more questions here, and then I think we going to go out on a high note here. So Dr. Gary says, what are some major cases in Oceanside you were involved in? We had so many. There's just so many cases and a lot of high profile stuff. I know Sylvia Guzman opened up the Zodiac situation where they believed Zodiac's first victim, and this is, still being looked into, was down on Pacific Street back in the day. But, John, you had the butcher.
Well, you had, as far as major cases, you had Matthew Checky.
I had Checky.
And that was nationwide. For sheer national coverage, it wasn't a murder case I had. It was the case where it achieved actually international coverage when it was Riva De Niro had come up with a lead on a child porn case.
Yeah.
And I said, go for it. We're gonna chase down child pornography. As it turns out, the case involved gay Marines that had been photographed, and and by this point, Oceanside Police is not involved in the case. Once we've discovered that there is no child pornography, we're not interested in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Well, back then they were still known as NIS, and I guess Mark Harmon didn't work for them then. They were NIS was investigating this. Well, NIS is not going to answer any questions. So all the questions about these Marines involved in this gay pornography end up being fronted into my office because I was a detective sergeant at the time. So I'm handling calls from NBC New York, BBC, newspapers all over the country, and I'm telling them throughout, we're not interested in gay pornography.
Yeah.
Okay? We were interested in child pornography, and the moment we determined there wasn't any of that. So that was the one that, as far as the cases that I had that had the most information, the most, if you will, publicity. But there was the Triani murder, and then the Butcher is the Butcher case.
We had Killer Sally, which is a Netflix series. That's the two weightlifters, remember? And I did the crime scene on, but Sheila and John Diaz were primary and second on that one. And then we had Garcia over who mutilated and dismembered his wife. I don't know if you were in. I think you had transferred by then, John, out of homicide, and I did the crime scene on that one, and there was some bathroom stuff in the toilet. Did you work that one too? Did you show up on that one?
No, I was not on that, but I'm also going to remind you before you wrap up, Chris, there was also Leticia Hernandez, and that was a huge case.
That was a huge case. Yeah, that was December 16th, 89 was Leticia. But I remember telling, it was either Cheryl or Michelle, when I was doing the crime scene at, Garcia, there was a poop in the toilet. And I said to Michelle, or I can't remember if it was Michelle or Cheryl, I said, hey, can you do me a favor? And she was, what do you want? I said,
well, you got to get the DNA.
Yeah, there's poop in the toilet. I need a swab on that. She goes, are you serious, McDonough? I go, yeah, I need it.
Well, at least you weren't looking for lands and grooves.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Swirls and turds. Swirls and turds. And, anyway, I don't know if she's ever forgiven me for that one. And then what else? I mean, we've had so much. I mean, we've Oceanside. I mean, we're just in 95 alone. I've got a plaque back here. Hang on, I'm going to get it. Just in 95 alone for the public. I don't know if you guys can see that, but you can't see through it. But it says, in appreciation for your dedicated service during a record year of 25 homicide investigations, 1995.
Yeah, one of those was mine.
Yeah. And you know what I mean? But this is what we were doing. And there's so many of them that we can't, I don't remember. Oh, I know Melanie Ballou. Remember that nut job who came out at the guys from the bathroom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Daryl Wood.
Daryl Wood. Yeah. And then, of course, yours, John. I mean, I don't know if you feel comfortable telling your story.
I don't have a problem with it. The guy was, what it was basically a suicide by cop. I was a patrol sergeant, and we had there was a man who had, I want to say it was a few months earlier, had attempted to murder his ex-wife and infant with a sword. He had a katana, a replica Japanese samurai sword. And he had been arrested, and they determined that he was, unfit mentally to stand trial, and they assigned him to go to county mental health and, go in every week and get his Haldol or whatever it was he was taking, which doesn't make you any of this crazy. It just supposedly doesn't make you able to act on those wacky impulses. But here's a shock. Why, the crazy guy stopped going to get his medication. And he began developing a plan that he wanted to. Now, I think you were in his apartment, Chris. You saw his stone altar he built.
Yeah.
And he had written a diary that said, the last entry in the diary is, today I kill a cop and get his gun and kill as many people as I can so I can be on CNN. If I remember correctly, this is what I heard later. So his plan was to basically do an extended suicide by cop and kill as many people as he could. And right around lunchtime, I was covering off on beats downtown because officers were taking their meal break. And I had a citizen wave me down and say, hey, there's some crazy guy down the block there, and he's kicking the side of an SUV, and I think you need to check it out. And so drove down the alley, and as I pulled up, the guy was kicking the side of the vehicle, turned around and looked at me, and we were right behind it might even still be there, the Angelo's, a hamburger restaurant on North Coast Highway.
Still there.
And he turned around and looked at me. Now, by this point, by 1995, I had been a hostage negotiator since 1980. Okay, so call it 15 years. I had talked to all manner and make of Looney Tunes and mental defectives. And this guy, you could tell he was in a class all by himself. And the minute he saw me, he reached into his pocket, turned sideways, and announced to me he was going to kill me. And I told him, no, this is not how this is going to work. You just need to chill. You need to, sit down. You need to show me your hand. But no, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. Over and over again. Unfortunately, we had a witness sitting in an 18-wheeler about 14 feet away he had front row center tickets for this. And there were probably another, 50 or 60 witnesses. I mean, there were all sorts of people. And we talked back and forth, and he kept edging slowly toward me. And when I just told him, no, you pull your hand out slowly. And as he began to pull his hand out, I pepper sprayed him, thinking, okay, we're going to try and blind him. At that point, the knife comes out, and it was a butcher knife. And he took a step toward me. I had already pulled my gun. I fired once, and the round hit him in the heart and severed his spine. And he hit the pavement, and he basically died almost immediately. And so I got on the radio and said, my call sign at that point was 12 Sam, and said, 12 Sam Station 1199, which means clear the air. I've got an emergency here. I've just had shots fired. I got a suspect down. Dispatch thought I was joking with them, because usually when a cop puts out an 1199 or shots fired, they're yelling. And there's dead silence. And I get on the air again and I say, 12 Sam Station 0, did you copy my last? I have shots fired. I have a suspect down. And then it was beep, 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 like that at the beginning of the show. And Chris was playing that. And the cavalry responded. And then Chris was called in. It was a three-way investigation. The district attorney investigated me. Internal Affairs investigated me. And then Chris investigated the assault on me. And, there were plenty of ample witnesses, and it was suicide by cop.
Yeah,
and,
it was a scary day for you, Johnny. And, all of us, throughout our careers, sometimes you have to do what John had to do in that scenario. Also, I think it's important to point out that even Dave Larson, remember with the guy with the rifle, this guy comes out
Knew him.
with a house, out of his house with a rifle. And Dave had pulled up in his patrol car, and as Dave's getting out of the car, the suspect levels his rifle at him. Just a split second, Dave had to respond. And he also fired his service weapon, and unfortunately, that individual did not survive. And I remember Dave saying to me, I was the case agent on that as well. I investigated that shooting, and Dave turned to me and when I was interviewing him, and I don't know if the public understands, even though I know John, even though I know Dave, I can, and I think they can both attest, even though Dave's not here and others, is I am always right down the middle. When the truth is the truth, this is truth. That's all it is. It's the truth. And we don't deviate from that. And Dave kept asking me, the first thing he asked me, he says, was the rifle loaded? Was the rifle loaded? He kept asking that question over and over. And I asked him, I said, what do you think? He said, I think it's loaded. Tell me it's loaded, please. I said, well, what was in your mind? He said, the guy was going to kill me. I said, okay. And at the conclusion of our interview, I told him, Dave, the rifle wasn't loaded. And you could see this emotional, part of the human existence where, another life had been taken, but under the circumstances, it could have been theirs. It could have been John's. I remember speaking to John that night. It could have been Dave's. It was Tony Zapatella. God bless him. He was an officer that was murdered. These are things that just happen. And can they be avoided? No. The human condition today, it's very scary out there for what these guys and gals go through. And there is just so much. Even Dan Bassett, who is another officer that was murdered on our department, he was shot from a distance with a rifle while standing out of his patrol car, and the suspect shot at him like in a sniper position and executed him. And these are the things that we on this panel know firsthand, what that's about out there. And so you guys, the public, continue to support law enforcement. I mean, are they perfect? Are we perfect? No. We're also human beings, and we do make mistakes. But I think our generation and our generation was the first to step up and say, you know what, I screwed up. I screwed up. And we would take the heat because they knew, yeah, you did. You messed up. But it wasn't drastic to where you couldn't fix it. We didn't have to, worry about what Google said, what our body camera said. We just knew that it was all going to line up because that's the way it is. And I'm worried out in the world today that there is not as much critical thinking skill because electronics is taking over thought process in relationship to even officer discretion in the field today. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that comment as a whole?
Bob, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Chris. It's the business is definitely changing, but your comments about this being an honorable profession is also spot on. It still is. It's taken a lot of hits, especially post George Floyd. However, if you look at all the facts and don't buy into the rhetoric and the propaganda, you will still see that law enforcement is one of the most noble professions in the world, especially in America here. My son is a police officer, and so he followed in my footsteps, and I'm very proud of that. And he works in a capital city fairly good sized department. So he sees a little bit of heat, and but I know he can handle it. He's surrounded by some great cops that are, from the current generation, and I'm an old school cop, and so are you guys. So we did things a little bit differently, and he'll come home every once in a while, or he doesn't live with me, but he'll tell me occasionally some of the things that they did. And I said, well, back in my day, we would do it this way, blah, 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 blah. But I had to take a step back from that occasionally, just to kind of look and remember that the generations before us did things differently. And so, each generation is different. But the bottom line for me anyway is it's still a very noble profession. And if there's any of your listeners that are considering law enforcement as a career, I would highly recommend that they check into it and do the research. And if they think they can handle it, go for it, because we need good people out there.
Well said, John.
What I would say for starters is, I'm sort of piggybacking on what you said about use of force. I'm going to ask both of you guys, how many times over the years could you have legally shot somebody? This is something that people don't understand.
Sure.
The number of times that, to give you an example, here's the postscript to my shooting. Chris, you may remember this. I was off for my requisite 3 days, came back on a Saturday. I was working day shift then. I'm downtown. I see a stolen car at Wally Johnson's motel, and it's gone now. I guess Wally Johnson's gone. Find out what room the guy's in. Now, this is I have just left the station, my first day back after the mandatory 72 hours off. We hit the door. The driver is in the room, reaches into the nightstand and starts to come out with a gun. I could have shot him. Probably wouldn't have been a good look shooting somebody the first 30 minutes I'm back on duty. But I managed to close the distance, put the gun against his temple, and what I told him was, you really don't want to be the second guy I've shot this week. And he dropped the gun. Later, he told the officer who was there, boy, your sergeant there thinks he's a big man. But the cop says, well, he wasn't kidding. He shot a guy on Wednesday. But you think of the number of nights when we could have shot people, when they went for knives, when they went for guns, and we talked. The other thing I'll say is this. When we shot back in the day, we weren't sending 17 hot rounds down range. We were trained for fire economy and marksmanship. And I'm not sitting in judgment of modern police work, but what I am saying is, if you practice, and I know both of you were at the range all the time, the muscle memory, that I don't know if you don't see that investment, but I will say this to anybody who is watching this. If you were to ask me during my career, how many people could I have shot legally that would have fulfilled the law, both ethically and legally? 20, 30? I mean, the number would go up. Bob, would you say that, Chris?
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, we had member Paul Duffield.
Yes.
And I got, I'll just, a last war story on my side, but, when Kevin was there with Tommy, again, doing a canine search, I was his backup with Irk. And Tommy was exhausted. So Corky looks at me and he goes, you're going to send in Irk. And I said, well, right now, they know we got a guy in there with a gun because he's trying to get through the skylight. And Sean Sullivan was up on the roof, and the suspect had climbed a bunch of the shelves and was hitting the skylight trying to get out. And so Sully comes up on the radio and says, hey, the suspect's pounding the skylight here with a pistol in his hand. And it was a 45. Anyway, so Corky says, McDonough, get up here with, it was me, Kaiser, Clint, Rich Davis, Clint Johnson. When we get up to the door, and I turned to Corky and I said, hey, if this guy's armed right now, why don't we got to back out on this thing. It's a SWAT situation. And he said, no, he says, go in and send Irk. I said, Cork, we can't do that. It's a violation of the, blah, blah, blah. The canine policy at the time, armed suspect. We knew he was armed. He goes, I'm ordering you to send in the dog. I could have him. I said, okay, I follow orders. Anyway, Clint slides the door open. And just as he slides the door open, he's about maybe 20 feet into the store on the other side of the counter. Boom, boom, boom. He starts capping rounds. And I hit the deck. RL's next to me. Kevin's next to me. All three of us are on the deck. I let Irk go. Irk goes in around the counter, and he jumps, and he takes Duffield down. And he's on the bite, and he's about ready to, I think, shoot the dog. And I'm in on top of him, probably about 6 feet away. And he takes the weapon and he puts it into his mouth. And now it's a hold on, standby, right? He's holding himself hostage. And so I start trying to communicate with him. And as John and Bob, you guys probably remember, he was a deaf mute. He couldn't speak and he couldn't hear. And he was yelling, "Mo, mo, mo, mo," and I couldn't understand him. So he ends up taking the weapon and he shifts hands and he puts the weapon right here. And I'm trying to communicate with him, and he's like, "Mo, mo, mo," and I called the dog off. Irk is next to me. I'm probably 5 or 6 feet away from him. By this time, Corky's there, and the cavalry's in the background, and everybody's into the building. And long story short, he's like, "Mom," and he's pointing to the Coke machine. And I'm not taking my eyes off him, but I yell, "He wants something to drink. Get him something to drink." So Rich Davis, what do you think he buys him? We have to see. Everybody knows.
We shouldn't laugh, but
but every cop knows that Rich Davis drinks Dr. Pepper. Okay. And this suspect is going, "Mom," and I said, "He wants a Coke. Get him a Coke." Okay. Next thing I know, I hear, and here comes the can, the soda can. And he's looking at me, Mama, and he looks over, and RL rolls this Coke at him, right? And out of the blue, he leans up against the, there was like a bookshelf, and up on top of the bookshelf was a guitar case. And all of a sudden, he hits that bookshelf, it dislodges that guitar case, and he's looking at me, and it comes down and it hits his feet, and boom, it was over. Corky comes in. He goes, "Why did you shoot him?" I said, "Cork, I didn't shoot him. The guy just killed himself in front of me." And in front of all of us, right? We were all there. Okay. And at the end of it, part of the debrief, we could go on for days, but to your point, how many of us, all of us have been in that situation so many times where I could have pulled my trigger, really quick on that situation. But, what did we get out of it? Nothing. We got a letter that said, "Thank you for using restraint." Thank you for.
we're lucky.
Huh?
If you were lucky, you got that letter.
Yeah, if you were lucky. Yeah. I've actually got the commendation. I won't pull it up, but maybe one day I'll share it. But my wife said, please share this picture. This is her favorite picture of me when, remember every once in a while, if you were in COV, John, the Barry would say, go to the beach team for a couple of weeks, chill out.
Well, they're really good men.
This was my wife's.
San Miguel Police Department.
There it is. Officer friendless. Officer friendless. I mean, we could go on for days and days, but I did this for my sweetheart who asked me to put it up. Don't ask me why, but I love her to death. And you guys are amazing friends, amazing officers. I mean, just unbelievable careers. We're 2 hours and 30 minutes into this. This is the first kickoff of the choir practice. I'm hoping to make this a regular program. But, you know, sincerely, I thank you for your service. I thank you for all the things you guys taught me, you know, coming into the game. And I really thought I had died and gone to heaven when Bob Kraus was, or it was Green, in the back lot my first week out on my shadow car, and I had a Marine who had punched me in the head and cut my head here, and
I got him.
Yeah, it was Bob.
I remember this.
And he looks into me, he goes, what happened? I said, oh, Sarge, you know, blah, 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 a big fight down there. He goes, look at me, looks in the back seat, looks at me again. He goes, what happened, rookie? I said, hey, Sarge, you know, huh? Right? He goes, do me a favor, son. He said, don't you ever come back to the Sally Port unless that guy's bleeding more than you. You understand, sir? I said, yes, sir. He says, go ahead and book him. No, he's not hurt, right? No, sir. I said, okay, book him. But don't you ever come back here like that. He said, yes, sir. And I thought, oh my gosh, you know, this is great. I love this job. What an amazing position to be in, and what an amazing career. I mean, Bob, you went off to become a chief, right?
Well, no, I retired second in command of an agency. Yeah.
There you go. And John, you went off to write many, many books. And if you are not familiar with John's books, they're in the links below. Make sure you get in and write those or get those books on Amazon. It helps him. And he's also writing some more books. You have a series coming out. Johnny, what's the name?
Yeah, we hope we have a series. I've got literary agents. In fact, you're looking at it. The memoir, and the first one is called Service with a Sneer. I'm working right now on Beach Blanket Bedlam, where there are some of the stories that we have shared, and then there'll be Bring Out Your Dead from my years in homicide. So you've heard some of the stories here. I'm hoping I can get an agent or a publisher interested in these because I pull no punches with. I mean, if I do stupid stuff, I come right out and admit it. And as anybody would have gathered by now, I don't suffer fools gladly. So this is sort of what the writing is like. So if you like different synonyms for pinheads, morons, and imbeciles.
Bob, you looks like you're a serious one here. This guy has an amazing sense of humor, but, you know, he's just a super amazing human being, and he's seen a lot in his career, a lot.
One of the nicknames they tagged me with over the years is Stoneface, so I don't take it as
You were also Bob Bitchin. Because this was his nickname, because Bob truly did look bitchin'. Tell you what, chiseled in his police uniform, we called him. Right. This was in an era when police
nicknamed off of him. When
so was, and remember, and you heard me refer to Sergeant Graff's nickname, Sergeant Grapefruit.
Yeah.
Because he was round and yellow.
Oh, Ron Graff.
I love it. Well, any other thoughts before we go to Hawaii, guys? All right. Thank you, brother.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right. Well, let's go to Hawaii, and God bless each and every one of you out there. Let's always remember our brothers and sisters in blue, as well as our firefighters, our nurses, our doctors,
animal control people too.
Animal control people. Yeah. I mean, we shot the bull. Remember at the 4-H club, Chuck Cosmo shot the bull.
And remember when we shot the mountain lion?
I know we could. I know we could go on for days. Just a one word, and there's 4 or 5 stories that already popped up. Let's remember the people in Maui who are suffering over there. There's a lot going on. Remember the people in the Middle East and all the people in Israel who are suffering. The children who, by no fault of their own, they're in the middle of this problem, and any children that are suffering here in this country. The children do not get a chance to choose. We as adults get to choose, but the children do not. So keep them in your prayers always. And we'll see you on the next one. God bless you, and thank you so much all for everybody being here tonight. See you guys. Have a good night. Let's go to Hawaii.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a while.